So shalom everyone. Today is October the 11th, 2021. We are talking about Parshat Lekh Lekha. But before we talk about Lekh Lekha, we have to do a little bit of Noah. We should do also Breshit because I didn't talk about Breshit. Our class is starting with Lekh Lekha. But to sum up, Breshit, the world was created, didn't end up really, really too good. And so uh, God decides that he's got to start again, and that's what happens with Noah. And then, of course, Noah is the person who is um, charged with repopulating humanity. Uh, when we get to Lech Lecha, we have all of that in hindsight. We are the readers, and so we are the ones that are reading what is coming in front of us with the information that has been given to us already. Information that is narrative information, information regarding certain words already that have keyed us, and maybe a context in which we can locate the present story. And as we study the story of Abraham, it occurs to me on this round of studying it and for this presentation, I am still very much immersed in Noah and immersed in the idea that there are some really important differences between the way the Torah talks about Noah and the way the Torah talks about Abraham. And I'm going to show them to you right away. And I'm just going to pull up my text here to get it ready for you. And I'm going to spotlight myself, okay, and then share the text here. So just give me a second. Here we go. This is Noah and his family, okay? So I'm going to move this over. I was watching recordings of these and wanted to just improve the way we do this. Um, we are told that Noah, at the beginning of last week's Parsha, this is how the Torah introduces us to Noah. I have highlighted here on this sheet the important information which I want to highlight, which is that Noah seems to always be introduced with his family. Vayoled Noach shlosha vanim et Shem et Cham et Yafet. Noah is introduced at the end of the genealogy of Adam. Okay, he's at the end of Breshit, just in terms of his name, Ze Yenachamenu. He is the one who will comfort us. We learn that Noah is 500 years old when he has his children. And as the story of Noah begins, he is introduced with his three sons, Shem, Cham, and Yafet. And that is very important, okay? Notice that when God says to Noah, Aseh lecha et hateva, or teva datzei gopher, make the ark, it's Hakimoti et briti itach. I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. So already the Torah is orienting us in the way that it has introduced Noah, and in the way that it has told us, God said to Noah, you will go into the ark with your family, that Noah is already located in a family. Noah, as much as I want to see him as a solitary individual, Noah cannot be detached from his family. And the next 11 texts in the Parsha of Noah are going to illustrate that even more. Okay? It says here in chapter 7, verse 1, God said to Noah, Bo ata v'chol beitcha. You go into the ark with all your household, for you alone have I found righteous before me in the journey. Despite the fact that Noah is the righteous person, he goes into the ark. He is to go into the ark with his family, not by himself. Again, Vayavo Noach v'ishto. The narrator reports that Noah goes into the ark with his family. Noah with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives, they go into the ark because of the waters of the flood. So there is an obvious reason for this. The obvious reason is that if it goes in by himself, how is he going to be able to populate the world afterwards? I mean,
Right.
he's got to go in at least with his wife. But as I mentioned in shul last week, he's 500 years old and he's already got 3 children. So there's not so much more procreating that he's going to do, even though the Torah leaves that possibility open. So he's got to go in with the critical mass of humanity, and that is his 3 sons, who may not necessarily be so righteous as his, but they are in there because of him. He is the righteous one. He can't populate the world by himself like Adam, so he's got to rely on his 3 sons and their wives. And he is very much a family. Again, Genesis 7:13, the same day Noah and Noah's son, Shem, Ham, and Yaveh went into the ark with Noah's wife and 3 wives of his sons. So over and over again, I have about 13 sources here in the chat in Noah alone, in that parsha alone, where Noah goes in with his family. Just one more or 2 more. Well, here this is the only instance where God singles out Noah. Vayiskor Elohim et Noah. God remembered Noah. God doesn't remember Noah and the family. God remembers Noah alone. So that might be the exception to this case. But in chapter 8, verse 16, come out of the ark together with your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives. The rabbis have a very, very close reading of this, saying that this is when they are resuming relations. He wants them to have relationship with each other. Up until now, it was separate. The Noah and his sons, and Noah's wife and his daughters-in-law. Here it's Ata v'ishtecha, and the rabbis tell us that they had suspended all kinds of marital activity for the year, for the 370 days on the ark. I think that's a lovely interpretation. But it's clear in both cases that he's a family. And then he goes out. He leaves together as a family. And then 9, God blessed Noah and his sons. 9:8, Noah and his sons. 9:11, my covenant with you, plural, briti itchem, brit beini uveinechem, me and you, the reiteration of the covenant between God and Noah's descendants. Asher beini uveinechem, 9:15, me and you, and that is what it is. So I have 13 sources here that tell me that Noah is part of a family, that Noah is defined by his relationship not with his father, who is Lekh, who died at age 777, or his grandfather, Methuselah, who died at age 969, which we don't know whether or not he died in the flood or just prior to the flood, but it's significant that Lamech, his father, doesn't die in the flood, dies several years before the flood. And Noah is really defined in terms of his nuclear family. You know, it's like, I'm going to close the screen for a second. It's like he lives in an old neighborhood, right? Where, you know, he lives in the downstairs duplex, and in the upstairs apartments, he's got 3 sons and their wives. So he and his wife are living in the downstairs, and upstairs, you know, in apartment 1 is Shem and his wife. Apartment 2 is Ham and his wife, and apartment 3 is Yefet and his wife. And frankly, right up until about 100 years ago, that's the way that most people lived, right? I could point to that is in my own ancestral family, and I'm sure you can all point to that in your own family. In other words, people clustered in their own families, and the living arrangements on the ark really replicates a double generation, a 2-generation family setup. It usually goes beyond 2 generations. There may have been a 3-generation setup in the normal course of life. The Bible really knows of a maximum of 4 generations of great-grandparents. And today, we would consider it very, very unusual for grandparents, parents and children to live in the same unit. Although, if you go into certain areas in the Middle East, for sure, especially in Arab communities, for sure, you see this kind of clan structure. Okay, so that's my case now, is that Noah is presented as a family man. I'll stop for questions, and let's see if anybody has any questions here. I'm just going to get everyone. Just got to rearrange the way we I'm seeing everybody here. Anybody with a question here? Go, Alana.
Not a question, just a comment. How would Noah feel if he would be told just to leave his family and go by himself? I mean, it's normal for somebody who has a family to take his family to a certain journey or a certain moving somewhere. So we should agree with this.
We should agree with it, and I think I'm going to go one step further, Alana, and say this is luxury. This is a luxury to be able to go with your family. You know, I'm not going to focus on this, but it's in the background here. You know, we are living, mostly roughly a century after great waves of immigration. Some people have immigrated, within the last half century. Some 3/4 of a century, and some are descendants of immigrations 100 and 125 years ago. If we had the time, I'd do a survey of everybody here. Okay, in my own case, it's 1928, so close to 100 years for me that my grandparents came to North America. Okay, and I'm sure that it's plus or minus 25 or 50 years for all of us. Okay, so if I were to go, and I see Marlene, I see your hand. If I were to just look at the immigration experiences of typical members of our generation, it's not like this at all. And I'm saying immigrant experience because I'm anticipating Abraham in a second. Immigrant experiences consist of either whole families, a luxury, or most often it was one individual in the family that went ahead of everybody else. In the case of America, earned the money, sent the money back to who knows where in Russia, Ukraine, Poland, etc. If they were lucky, they were able to take the money, bribe or buy the tickets for people to get the passage to come back. And in many cases, it didn't work. In many other cases, people, not many, I mean, anecdotally, individuals left their families behind and started new families altogether in the new world. And those were deeply tragic situations. Marlene, you had your hand up. I'm sorry. No, it's okay. All right. So let me go on with the difference here between Noah and Abraham. Okay, I'm just going to pull up my introduction of Abraham. And here we go.
Rabbi?
Yes.
You're assuming that, or are we to assume that a family unit means parents and children? Why isn't a family unit the two people who were the progenitors or the protectors, or Adam and Eve were the family? Abraham and Sarah are the family. Noah just happens to have Shem, Ham, and Japhet.
I think that's such a great question, and it's also incredibly charged in our own time when the whole idea of family is completely, I don't want to say upended, but completely, it is completely up to definition. That is to say, I mean, without getting too involved in this, but we know of single parent families, we know of same-sex parent families, we know of blended families, we know of post-family, we are in a kind of post-traditional family situation. So the Bible certainly understands multiple kinds of families. And we're going to see a very complicated family situation with Abraham.
Yeah, men married to their sisters,
Absolutely. Right? You're anticipating Abraham is a very, very complicated family. And that is part of the problem. Okay, let's go into Abraham, and I'm going to share my screen here with Abraham. Here we go. Okay, so this is my introduction of Abraham. I'm going to move this over to get it here. All right, so I'm asking the question really, what kind of information do we get about Abraham prior to our story here? We have a bit of Abraham in the previous, at the end of Noah. Okay, So I'm starting with his grandfather Nahor. It's complicated because Abram has a grandfather named Nahor and he has a brother named Nahor. Okay, so his brother Nahor was named after his grandfather, I guess. Vayechi Nahor teshav esrim shana vayoled et Terach. So the grandfather Nahor was 29 years old when he fathers Terach. Okay, and then verse 26, Vayechi Terach shivim shana vayoled Abram et Nahor et Haran. Terach is 70 years old when he fathers Abram, Nahor, and Haran. That is an incredible piece of information that tells us that Nahor is half the age of his son, 29, when he becomes a parent. We would say that's a normal age today for someone to be a parent. You know, people are having children later. I don't know the statistics of what the average age of fatherhood is, but it seems reasonable within our own context. 70, to us, seems unreasonable. But that's the difference between Terach and Nahor. Terach, Abram's father, is an old man, so to speak, when he has children. Nahor is a young man. In verse 26, it tells us that it introduces Abram as part of a family of three brothers. So we have Avram, Nahor, and Haran. I have the translation below, but this is the way it works. And here we go. Verse 27. Ela toldo Terach holidet Avram et Nahor et Haran. So we know already in this verse that Abraham, again, three brothers, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran holidet Lot. And this is something different. The fact that it adds the birth to Haran of a son named Lot is an alert to us that the Torah is going to focus a little bit on Lot. It doesn't tell us who Haran's wife is, and it inserts that information so that we have to ask the question, wait a minute, what's going on here? And here's what's going on. Vayamot Haran al pnei terach aviv. An astounding record. I focus in on this all the time and say that this little half a verse, Vayamot Haran al pnei terach aviv, was the game changer. We overlook it. Every single commentator in the world overlooks this little factoid. And I think it's the most important fact of the whole story. Naturally, you know, I'm personally involved in it because there's sibling loss here, and you know, without going into this, you all the idea, and of course, I'm also saying this to a group of people who've experienced these kinds of things. You know that in the loss of a sibling, it changes the course of your life. Absolutely, changes the dynamics, it changes the relationships. It changes everything. In the case of Abraham, it changes everything because Haran dies with a son. So the question is, the guy, Lot, we don't know how old Lot is, but he's got no father. He's got no father, but he has two uncles and a grandfather. He has two uncles. One uncle is Nahor, and one uncle is Abram. Okay? And we learn in the very next verse that in this verse, Haran died while Terach was still alive. A tragedy, okay? While they were still in the land of Ur-Kasdim. So, it seems then that after this, Abram and Nahor have wives. One wife was Sarai, and the other was Milcah. Milcah was the daughter of Haran, Avi Milcah, Avi Yiska. We're not going to talk about Yiska, but we'll talk about Milcah for a second. If Milcah is the daughter of Haran, then what does that make in terms of the relationship between Milcah and Lot?
Brother and sister.
They're brother and sister. So Milcah and Lot are brother and sister, and Lot's uncle is married to his sister. Okay? That's an interesting situation. We learn that Sarai is barren. What the Torah doesn't tell us here, but it tells us elsewhere, is exactly what Marlene said, which is that Sarai is the half-sister of Abram. That's not often told, but when in the second episode where Abram tries to pass his wife off as his sister, he says, and in fact, she is kind of like my sister, because she's really my sister from a different woman. She is the daughter of my father with a different woman. This introduces us to, I think, a very, very complex family system, okay, like we were talking about. And then we have the following in verse 29. We know that Haran, I'm going back to the fact that the two, Abram and Nahor, have wives. And I'm saying, presumably, Haran also had a wife because Haran's son Lot was born to him. His wife is not named. So we don't know who Haran's wife was. And obviously, it's not important for the story. She's a widow. But more importantly, Lot, the nephew, is essentially an orphan. You know, Haran's wife is lost to history. Okay, in verse 31, we get an interesting event. I'm just going to go through my comments here. Who is Sarai? Sarai is not identified here. Some will identify her as Yiska, but later in the Torah, she is identified as Abram's half-sister, and besides, she is in truth my sister, my father's daughter, though not my mother. That's the verse. So Abram married Terach's daughter from another woman. Sarah is barren. And verse 31, Terach proceeds to leave Ur Kasdim with his family. Terach is the 10th in line from Noah, just as Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yafet, who populated the world. Shem, Mesopotamia, Ham, Africa, Yafet, Southern Europe. Terach seems to have ambition of populating the region of what is now Israel, Lebanon, and Jordan. And I'll show you the map in a second, okay? So this is going to be important to see when we go to, I'm just going to close this and bring up some other visual information for us to see right now, okay? Here we go. In this map here, we have, I'm going to just make it larger. This is a Google map of the modern Middle East or ancient Near East, the modern Near East, okay? And this is going to be a very interesting map to explore. In this area, we have Mesopotamia, okay? The ancient world, as known to the biblical writers, was basically what I have in the square, maybe expanding a little bit wider, okay? What the claim that the Bible is making is that Noah's sons basically, plus or minus a little bit of territory here and there, inhabit these regions. Shem in this region, which is Mesopotamia and kind of like, you know, southern Mesopotamia, what would be now Turkey, Syria, Iran, Iraq, okay? That Yafet is the European nations, most like Southern Europe, Greece. Ashkenaz is mentioned as one of those. Ashkenaz is already Northern Europe, and a little bit to the east, okay? Ashkenaz. And the Ham nations essentially are Africa with a little bit of incursion into the land of Israel and a little bit of incursion into Arabia. There is overflow. It's not, I used to like to say that, you know, make it very simple, that Shem is Asia, Yafet is Europe, and Ham is Africa. And the nexus of all those continental regions is in the land of Israel, which is why the land of Israel is, you know, the center of the universe for the biblical imagination. That's not exactly correct. There's overlap, okay? But what's important is that Terach, who is 10th in line from Noah, sees himself kind of like a Noah. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yafet, and Terach had 3 sons, Abram, Nahor, and Haran. If Noah populated the world with Yafet in Europe, Shem in Mesopotamia, and Ham in Africa, then even though Terach is 10 generations descended, Terach says, hey, I'm special. I want to populate a region too, and this is my region. Nahor here, and Abram here, and Haran here. But Haran is dead. There is no Haran. So it's going to go to Lot. And sure enough, this is where Nahor ends up. Later on in the Bible stories, Abraham is sending Isaac back to this area, or Eliezer, and then Jacob is going to send, he's going to go himself back to this area to find a wife. They all want women from the ancestral home, or from their relationships, their cousins, basically. Okay, so it's a smaller area as opposed to the bigger area of Shem, Ham, and Yafet. They are to occupy a smaller area, and Abraham is to occupy this area here. And all of these are the Terach descendants, Abraham, Haran, and Nahor. Okay? So I'm trying to make a geographical case for the way that the Bible presents the story. Of course, the Bible doesn't give you a map. The Bible gives you a text and a story, and you are populating the story in your imagination. If you are an ancient Israelite, you don't have a concept of geography beyond over there, and over there, right? Right? If you could just, transport yourselves imaginatively to the land of Israel and stand, let's say, on Mount Scopus, which many of us have done, which is a beautiful experience. If you're standing on Mount Scopus, the tour guide says to you, look over to the east, you see Jordan. Look to the north, you see Samaria. Look to the south, you see the hills of Judea. Look to the west, and you're going to see if you can see that far on a clear day without smog, you'll see the Mediterranean Sea. I'm not sure that's true, but can you see as far as the Mediterranean from Mount Scopus? Alana?
No,
I don't think so. You can see close. Can you see Tel Aviv from Mount
can
Scopus?
imagine.
You can imagine. Okay.
Mount Scopus? I don't think so.
You can see something to the west. You'll be able to see something, but not all the way to the sea. Certainly. Okay.
Really matter.
No.
Anyway, this is what the world looks like, and I'm saying that Terach is a personality that we don't know a lot about, except for 2 major facts. One fact is that he has 3 sons. Second fact is that he obviously married a second wife. Third fact is that his son died while he was still alive. Fourth fact is that he undertakes his own journey as well. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Any questions so far? I'm trying to introduce these characters, and we're going to go on here. Okay, so now we're going to get interesting. We're going to talk about Abraham in much more depth and go through the story. And here we go. Okay. Yeah, really. Good. Here we go. So now, let's read the verse. God says, Lekh Lekha me'artzecha u'mimoladetcha u'mibeit avicha. An iconic verse, to be sure. We've talked about it many, many times. This was the class I gave last year. The elements of this, how we understand Lekh Lekha, the breaking forth from your geographical boundary, your cultural boundary, and the microculture of your own family. And so what God is saying to Abraham is, you need to detach yourselves from all of those bonds, from your geographical bond, your cultural bond, cultural and linguistic bond, and your familial bond to your father. Okay? It's a dislocation. What does it mean to leave your father's household? So I'm going to propose here, and nobody says this, therefore I think it could be wrong, okay? But then again, I want to challenge myself and everyone else. To leave your father's household means to detach from Sarai, because Sarai is his father's daughter, right? She's a half sister. It also means to detach from Lot, his father's grandson. Okay, why couldn't that be a plausible, interpretation of leaving your father's house? Beit avicha is a clinical, textual, technical term. We see it later on in the Torah for sure. When the instructions are given for the Passover sacrifice, you say labayit. Everybody has to have, their whole clan, their whole family has to have a sheep. Okay, so here it's the clan. You are separating from your clan. Marlene, go ahead.
Why couldn't we say that from the house is the physical house and the not necessarily leaving behind all memory?
We could say that it's the physical house, and so it's a good kind of counter argument to my argument, which is you can by leaving Beit Avicha, you're leaving the physical house, and you're not necessarily leaving the members of that house. You could take a few of them with you. I'm actually making a much more provocative case here, which is you got to leave everything. And I'm saying this because, like we talked about the migrant stories of a generation, 100 years ago, how did people migrate? They didn't migrate with their entourage. They migrated. I mean, if they were wealthy, they migrated with people. But if they had nothing, I mean, how many of us heard, I came over with 2 pennies in my pocket. I came over with nothing. And I worked and I worked and I worked on the Lower East Side or wherever, and I saved and scrimped and saved, and I sent and I brought them back. Or I worked, I had nothing and nothing, and I found a life here. I made a life here. Okay, so it's unusual that people can come with their whole family. And what's unusual here is that God is saying to Lekha something that I think is very difficult. It's a tremendous challenge, which is sever everything. Sever your connection to your landscape, sever your connection to your culture and language, sever your connection to your father, because I'm going to make you a new people. Okay, so I'm saying Abram is to go alone. You're supposed to go alone, and then all of the blessings, unlike Noah, are done in the singular. So if Abraham has been educated with a little bit of tradition here, which we're also assuming, he's saying, wait a second, God, when you told Noah to go in the ark, you told him to go with his family, but are you saying that to me to go alone? I'm going to make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. All of these statements are directed to Abram alone, not to his wife. And of course, he has no children. Abram has Sarai, but she's not included. Noah had a whole family, a wife, 3 sons, 3 daughters-in-law. Noah was to recreate humanity. Abram, unlike Noah, is to start a new nation by himself from scratch, perhaps not even with his existing wife. So 2 interpretations here is that 1, even at the age of 75, he is supposed to go along that arc that you saw and get himself a new wife and start anew. He knows, the text tells us that his wife is barren, right? So it doesn't say to us, go divorce your wife, but it implies start over, and I'm going to make you a new nation, so you're going to need a new wife because your existing wife doesn't have children. And we have diagnosed the problem as hers, not yours, okay? How we did that is, we're going to leave that. But the point is that you're just going to start over. Unlike Noah, you have nobody else to start with. I'm choosing you because you are, it doesn't say why he chooses him. Okay, we go on. I will bless you. I will bless those who bless you and curse them that curses you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you, Abram. Okay? The Torah gives no reason for why God has chosen Abram. Unlike Noah, God doesn't disclose any of his thinking to Abram, just the consequence of following him, which is blessing. All these statements are directed to Abram alone. Sarah is not in the, she's not listening. It's God is speaking to Abram. Okay, so he goes. Verse 4 says, Vayelech Avram ka'asher diber elav Hashem. Abraham goes as the Lord had commanded him. Diber. It's interesting that the text says Vayomer, but here it says the text understands that this is a commandment to him. So I'm reading this with a big, huge space. Abraham goes forth, and I'm going to say, just for the sake of pedagogy, that he takes a 100-yard starter on the journey, and Lot is in whatever building or house or tent, and he says, hey, what happened? Where did Abraham go? And Lot comes running after him. Vayelech ito Lot. I don't think they go out together. Here, this text seems to me conclusive that Abraham goes alone and that Lot goes with him. And Abraham is 75 years when he leaves Haran. Abraham, what is the significance of Lot going with him? Abraham intended to go by himself. No Sarai, no Lot. But Lot followed him. Why? So here I'm trying to get into the backstory and trying to understand what's going through Lot's mind. I'm going to say, wait a second, I'm going to say that Lot is a young man here. Okay, he's got no father. Why not stay with Nahor, right? Why not stay with his grandfather, Terach? Because Nahor is married to Lot's sister, Milcah. Lot has no future with Nahor. Nahor and Milcah are going to establish their own family, and Lot knows that he is going to be outside of that family. He considers, if Nahor and Milcah have a daughter, I might marry her, because she would be my cousin. But I would have my sister as my mother-in-law. Forget it! I'd rather cast my lot with my uncle Abram. He may yet produce a daughter whom I could marry. Or if not, I would find a wife in the area that he goes to and establish my father's territory adjacent to his, as Terah had intended. So I am reading quite a bit into this, but I can't help myself from reading this. I can't help myself from interpreting this way, and can't help by saying that, wait a minute, he's got his own thinking here. This is a young man. Abram is an older man. He's got to look at his future. Where is he more likely going to have a future? With his uncle, Nahor, and his wife, who's his sister, who I don't know what his relationship is with him, but he's certainly not going to amount to much in that household. He's going to try and be with his uncle. He's got a fighting chance with his Uncle Abe. Uncle Abe is going to a new land. Uncle Abe may or may not be going with his wife. If Uncle Abe goes, I'm going with him. He'll marry someone. I'll marry his, hopefully he'll have a daughter. Or if he doesn't have a daughter, I'll be next to him. And I am his brother anyway, because my father, alav hashalom, was his brother, and I am the inheritor of my father, and I don't have my own means of managing
Look at that
myself.
lot, right?
I only can have a better chance with Abram. Susie, go ahead.
Yeah, but it says Vayelech ito Lot.
Yes.
Ito, not acharav. And it's in this, not only in the same pasuk, but it's in the same clause of the pasuk. So I think that argues that they went out together.
So they went out together. Sorry, I'm just going to put myself next to you. So you're saying again. So that
it says Vayelech ito, not acharav.
Yeah.
And not only is it in the same pasuk, but it's in the same clause of the pasuk.
Yes.
The nachta comes at the end of that.
Right. Okay. So what are you saying? Are you saying that what does that mean? I think that just proves my case.
That they're going together, not one following the other.
Okay, fine. So I'm doing a little bit of sleight of hand here and saying that the fact that it says, instead of saying yachtav, the first is Vayelech Avram, Okay, I'm just put up my text for a second. Vayelech Avram kasher diber elav Hashem. Instead of saying Vayelech Avram velot v'Sarai. Okay, the text could have said, I'll share the text again. The text could have said Avram Sarai. The text could have said Vayelech Avram v'Sarai velot, like it said with Noach. It said Noach ba banav v'ishto banav, etc., etc. It doesn't say vi here. It says alone Vayelech Avram. And I'm saying, so you're saying the Adnachta diber elav Hashem is a katon. So and we have to understand that the trope markings are interpretation altogether. But even still, Vayelech ito Lot is a separate clause. So my interpretation here is that Abram's going out alone. Otherwise, the text would have said Vayelech Avram vilot v'Sarai. But so I'm making a story here, a plausible story, which is Abram goes out on the journey, heads to the corner, and Lot looks around and says, "Hey, what happened?" and runs after him. And then the text tells us that he's 75 years old here, and that is the way of the text saying to us, "Hey, look at this. Young man, old man. Young man, no father. Old man, no children. Young man thinks he's going to be like his uncle's brother to take the place of his father. Lot, that is, taking the place of Haran, which is what happens later on." Just a second.
Rabbi.
It's mine. I'm sorry. All right. I didn't put my airplane mode on before, which I need to do. Sorry. Back to you all. Okay. So Marlene had her hand up. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yes, God didn't speak to Lot. He spoke to Abraham or Avram.
Yes. God spoke to Abram. Right.
Right. So he speaks to Avram, and Avram starts to leave, and Lot goes with him, not because he was told by God.
That's right.
So that
Maybe
they
he
were a
overheard.
pair.
Lot goes of his own initiative to
But it doesn't say he followed him. It said he went with him.
So he went with him. So I'm adding followed, right? Because it's what I'm saying is, like, the picture I have in my mind is, Abram started out, right? He doesn't. So because the text says he starts out, the text says he goes. Then Lot goes with him. It doesn't say vayivrach, which means he ran after him. It doesn't say vayelech achar ito. It says vayelech ito. So could it be that did they sit and say we're going? Even still, it raises a question, which is, well, Sarai's not in that verse. She's not going.
But that's his family, Rabbi. Noah took his family, and Abram took his.
No, I'm
No,
gonna
we
make
didn't.
I'm gonna try this out idea.
Can I help here?
Go ahead, help.
In the following pasuk, in pasuk,
Well, we're gonna get to the
it
following.
says Vaikach.
Okay, so good.
Vaikach. So
Here we go.
either he agreed for them to go with him, or maybe he had to pull a little bit. Vaikach Avraham et Sarai אשתו ואת לוט.
Here we go. So this text, this is exactly what you're saying, Ilana. Vaikach Avram, this is the very next verse. Abram took his wife Sarai and his brother son Lot and all the wealth that he amassed and the persons that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan.
So it's like he packed them up. He packed them up with all his belongings.
Exactly. So now what I'm saying to you is that what's the story here? I'm proposing that God says to Abram alone, "You're going." Okay. Abram is saying, "Wait a minute, I have a family, but you told me to go, so I'm going." Lot sees Abram going out the door, says, "Hey, I'm going with you," and Lot goes with him. Once Lot goes with him, okay, Lot went with him, and then we have Okay, Abram has to make a decision. He says, I now have my nephew. What? I'm sorry to use, vernacular. What the hell am I going to do with him? Okay, I can't manage this by myself. I need my wife. Besides, I'm married. Abrams took his wife and his brother's son Lot and all the wealth and I have wealth and I have persons. I have people. I got my mishpacha. I got my clan. I got my business. I got my livelihood. Okay, my
He didn't go by
interpretation.
himself.
Hang on, that's right. So here we go. All right. So I mentioned that Terach, by going with him, this is back to Lot says, I could elevate myself to his status in lieu of my dead father and be his equal. With Nachor, I'll never be equal. If Abram could marry a half-sister, I should at least be able to marry a cousin from he and Sarai, or him and someone else. Okay, now, but the text now tells us that he took his Sarai's wife and Lot. In other words, this is not exactly the plan that God had in mind. God instructed him, Abraham, to go alone, without any family. Here, Abraham makes the fateful decision to take his wife and his nephew and his whole life to Canaan.
But we don't know that God said go alone. We really don't know that. He said go.
I'm saying, of course he said he's going alone. It says right here, Lekh, Lekha means go yourself.
But
Lekh, Lekha is go alone.
how many times have you told one of your children to do something and they embroider it and they made it a little bit broader? It's a logical thing to do. I mean, Abraham is a thinking person. He's not going to leave everything there and go by himself. He's 70 years old. He wants company. It would be normal for him to schlep everybody else along with him.
But if God is saying to you, and I think Abraham agrees with you, by the way, you don't have to. I'm inserting myself here because I want to insert the idea that it's not so simple. It's not so simple, right? Abraham has a problem in that he has to define. He desperately wants to define himself in the context of his family the same way that Noah defined himself in the context of his family. The exception is that Abraham's family is a little more mixed up, okay? Because Abraham lost a brother, because Abraham married his half-sister, because Abraham's brother married his niece, okay? It's a little more common, and his nephew.
Married his sister, is that?
Abraham married his half-sister. Nachor married his dead brother's daughter, okay, his niece. So you're telling me leave all of that. I just can't get up and leave all of that, okay? And yes, I'm saying on the one, it's the God's command to Abraham is not so simple. I don't understand it. Abraham's saying. So I'm going to go back to what I'm going to paraphrase. In other words, Abraham makes the fateful decision to take his wife and his nephew and his whole life to Canaan, right? He has to. And why? This is not a clean break from his past. This is only a geographical, cultural, and partial break from his past. But he asks himself, how will I function in this new land? Exactly what Eli said. Can I uproot myself at 75 and start out again with nothing? God told Noah to go with his family. Why cannot I go with my family? Or, I have responsibility. I cannot leave my wife. That would be wrong. I cannot leave my orphan nephew. That would be wrong. God has told me to go alone, but my family responsibility outweighs God's command. Or can I combine God's command with my own responsibility? And that's exactly what he does. Okay, I see two people have raised their hands. I'm going to go back to, go ahead. Go on, Marlene.
Noah leaves debauchery and evil people who are misbehaving. Abraham is leaving a philosophical aspect and going to follow one God.
That's a whole class right there. That's absolutely right. Okay, the Torah doesn't say all of this, but Noah. Let me try and recast this, which is in Noah's world, the whole world is kaput. Okay, in Abraham's world, it's not that the world is kaput. It's that I have a mission for you. Mission is I'm going to make your name great. You will be a blessing. There was a
so if we believe the midrash about him smashing his father's idols, there's where he leaves his father or the house of his father.
I haven't even touched that. Okay, and the reason is because the midrash is obviously trying to say exactly what you're saying here. The midrash is trying to place everything in the Torah within the frame of this is all about monotheism, which I think it is. Okay, but the story has so many little strands in it and so many curiosities and questions. It makes us wonder what the hell is going on here, right? This man is a part of something, and you're telling him to leave it all, and he's got family. The family is all kind of messed up, and he's going to go, and yes, he is special. We don't know why he's special yet. The Midrash tells us, yes, all those reasons, but it's not in the Torah. Okay, we make the big mistake of thinking that the story of Abraham smashing the idols is a Torah story. It's not. It's a beautiful, amazing, rich narrative on its own. It's where we've taught it many times to tease out all of the complicated philosophical ideas in that story. But on the surface, we don't have that. Go ahead, Bob. Bob, you had your hand up. Sorry, you have to mute. Unmute.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say I agree with your thesis and would just extend it perhaps in the following way.
Sure.
The Lekha also has the fourth meaning of go into yourself, as I was reading.
Sure.
And to what degree is Abraham challenging Noah just being obedient by also saying, I have free will and I'm not going to just go by myself, but I have responsibilities to my family. And so it's actually another way of his being more independent and dependent at the same time.
I agree with that completely, and I think you're onto something, and I would argue, very similarly that what is different between Abram and Noah is that Noah is quite the obedient person, and Abram is much more interesting. He's just much more. Look, I like the idea that non-compliant people are just more interesting than compliant people. Compliant people are just a little more boring. Okay, that Abram with a person who says to you, like when you say to your kid, clean up your room, and they say no, you have a story. Okay, a story that could end in violence. Okay. When you have a kid you say, clean up your room, and they do it, you love that child. The child does whatever, but you don't have a story. It's not interesting, okay?
And end very soon.
I'm joking in the sense that Abraham is a human being. Abraham is complicated. It's exactly as Ellie said. He's got, wait a minute, I'm 75. You're saying I'm going to go. So he tries. I'm saying, give him that 1 foot out of the door. But that 1 foot out of the door is going to cost him, and it costs him the second he goes out, which is his nephew comes after him and says, what the hell am I supposed to do without you? You're gonna leave me with my uncle Nachor and my sister? I can't stand my sister. I don't want to live in that household. He's married to my sister. If I marry his daughter, she's gonna be my mother-in-law. Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind? I'm going with you whether you like it or not. Okay? That's the skit I would write. Okay? And Abram says, of course, what do and he says to God, what am I supposed to do? What do you want from me? You're telling me to go. I don't want to go. I'll do whatever you want. But I got a wife. Yeah, okay, she can't have children. And we'll see coming forward, whatever that relationship is. Okay, fine. But I can't just uproot myself and be cruel to them. I'm a wealthy man. I'm 75 years old. I have an estate. I have, I have things. I have men and women and maidservants and servants and animals and all that stuff. And I'm going to take all that, or I'm going to leave her all. She's going to manage all that by herself. No, sorry. She's coming with me too. Okay. So he takes everything. And then, so if you're God, you say, interesting. I have an interesting character here. I'm telling him he's going, but he's going on his own terms. That's what I like about him. He's going on his own terms.
The first one to argue with God.
Exactly. Ilana, go ahead.
No, aren't we missing the dialogue between Abraham and God about, who is this God anyway? Does he know who is telling him? Okay, so I know that the Torah wants to show how righteous and how that he believes, and it reminds me about Akedat Yitzchak
Yes.
when he was told to do such an awful thing, and he's why isn't he asking some questions? But in Sdom, when he said, "What about more righteous people for like?" But there is a certain amount of people who are righteous. There, he does argue, and he has a dialogue with God. So
She says,
when it's about himself, he seems to be very agreeable. But when it's about other people, he is like a good lawyer.
So all those are amazing questions, and that's part of, it's Abram doesn't ask the question, but obviously we're asking the questions. I mean, that's how we're engaged here. We're wondering about this character. I'm making the claim here that there's a dialogue that's not in the text. The dialogue is, what am I supposed to do? So the dialogue is, I'm going to do it this way, and I'm giving him I guess the credit, or I'm trying to interpret here and saying that here's a guy that says, yeah, I'm going to leave. My father, by the way, back to the beginning, my father was on his way to Canaan. Okay? My father stopped in Haran. Read the previous chapter, and it's very puzzling. Terah goes to Canaan. He's on his way, but he stops there. What was he doing? Why was he going? Terah was the original immigrant. Terah was the one who was trying to take history by his own course. And so Abram says, this is interesting. And then God says to him prior to all this, you're the one that's going to go. You're the one that's going to be the start of the new world, the start of a new people. The new story begins with you. I know we have very limited time. Let me try and end up with this. Because what happens is that Abram gets into the land, okay? Abram took his wife, verse 5, and Lot, and all the wealth, etc. When they arrived in the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem, at the terebinth of Moreh, the Canaanites were in the land. So here's my comment. It must have occurred to Abram at this point that God's project is problematic. How can God give me the land of the Canaanites, descendants of Ham, are already in the land? We assume that Abraham knows that they are cursed. God has said, I will bless you. God's blessing of Abram versus Noah's curse of Canaan. But still, theologically, this means that the nations of the earth, descendants of Noah, do not get to claim territory just by the process of nature. God is determining who lives where. Up until now, the nations settle where they live. In Terah's case, they migrate. God now is determining the allotment of the earth. The nation that will ensue from Abram will be located in its own land. I think this is a very important comment. I'm going to kind of tote myself here and say as follows, that what is going on here is God determining the course of history, that God is inserting himself in the course of history. The populations just don't grow and expand and take up territory by the process of nature. Yes, you can have people immigrating. Terah is that model. He tries to determine on his own where he's going to live. But God is saying, Abram, I'm going to tell you where you're going to live. And I'm going to determine where your people is going to live. This is really the central theme of the Torah. You're going to live. I'm sorry to be, it's a proto-Zionist theme, which is I'm going to make a nation, and the nation needs to live in its own land in order to be the nation for mirroring my name in the world, for presenting me to the world. You need to have a base from which you do that, okay? And the way that things are determined in the course of geography is not by, peoples expanding and population expanding. It's because I say so. That's what's going on. But the problem is, I say so, and the Canaanites are in the land. That's a problem. Okay? So we have the Canaanites in the land, and Abram is a moral person. He's saying, wait a minute. God, you're telling me to go to this land. The Canaanites, who I know are cursed, fed on the Canaanites. They live in this land, and I'm living right beside them. Wait a minute. And so the first thing that he does is verse 12:7. God appeared to Abram and said, I will assign this land to your offspring. And he built an altar there. What does that mean? Why does God appear to Abram here? As a reassurance? Though the Canaanites are here, this land will be yours. The building of an altar at Shechem is in response to that. But Shechem is right next to the Canaanites. In other words, he plants Abram right next to the Canaanites and says, this is your land. And Abram says, wait a minute. I can't live. This land is, I'm not going to displace them. I don't have the power to displace them. I can't live next to them. They're cursed and I'm blessed. And so what happens? He leaves there. From there, he moved to the hill country of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And he built there an altar to the Lord and invoked the Lord by name. He doesn't want to live next to Canaanites. He wants to go to his own place. And he builds an altar there and he calls to God there. And I'm asking, but does God answer? And I'm saying, we don't know. Go on. Next, Vayisa Avram haloch v'naso hanegba. Then Abram journeyed by stages toward the Negev. I'm asking, why does Abram go to the Negev? No Canaanites there either. Or is it because he can claim the land on his own? And that's where we're going to leave it. I want to say as follows. I'm just going to remove my own spotlights. I'm going to see everybody here and remove everybody's spotlights. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. So what I'm saying here is that the prospect of going to the land, like we tell the story all the time in very simple terms, right? God said, go, Abram goes. Okay? God says, I'll make you a great nation. Abraham is silent. Abraham just says, wow, that's great. I'm saying the story is much more complicated. Noah had a family union. Abraham has a more complicated family unit. Noah went into the ark with his family. Abraham wants to go alone, but can't. He has responsibility, and his moral sense of responsibility to his family outweighs the demand that God is making upon him. And so, in the end, yes, he takes that 1 foot out of the door, but he has to go back. He takes Lot with him, he takes Sarai with him, and he takes his whole retinue, meaning that he will depart from his father's household, but not completely, okay? And he goes into the land, he establishes himself in Shechem, but he sees that there are Canaanites in the land, okay? God has told him to go there, but there are other people living there, okay? So he says, I can't live there. There are other people living there, so I'm going to move a little bit, okay? And he moves a little bit to where it's open, but there's still other people living there. So it goes to the Negev. There are other people there, but as you've been to the Negev, you know that fewer people live in the Negev than do in the Central Hill Country. And for that reason, Abram will stay in the Negev, and the Negev will be his own territory. All right, what we're going to see then is that things just get complicated. And by inserting this drama here, the family drama between Abram and his father, Abraham and his brother Nahor, Abraham and his deceased brother Haran, Abraham and his nephew Lot, Abraham and Sarai, his wife, who is also his half-sister, we are set for interesting things. Go ahead, Bob.
The only thing I would add to that is, could you say that this decision to take the family, to accept them, was one of his 10 tests that they talk about in Pirkei Avot?
So it's a very good question. The 10 tests, have been kind of canonized, okay? And there are different ways that people count up 10 tests. I don't want to be restricted to the 10. I'm saying that here's a man who is being tested at every turn. I'll give you a few more things that are not included in the test, which is, and I alluded to it, which is, and he calls out to God, Vayikra, okay? He calls out to God, and what does that mean? And I remember doing this, exercise with one of our bar mitzvah kids who had their bar mitzvah in one of these parshas. And I said, let's look at the life of Abraham and let's look at how many times that he calls God. And you would expect that God would answer him, but God doesn't answer him. Rather than reading the story in the way that we have mythologized it, which is like God and Abram are buds and that they're always talking to each other, no, this is the beauty of the story is that faith is not that you are constantly in a total conversation with God. Faith is that God breaks through at one moment, one little infinitesimal moment, and your life has changed. And your life is completely changed, and you want that to happen again, and you want it over and over and over and over again, but it's not going to happen. So you live your life as if that's going to happen, and it's going to happen again. And that is a much more complicated faith than Tevya. Tevya, I'm not going to make it, I'm not going to, be critical. I love Tevya, and I love that world, and what that world is it expresses a different kind of intimacy. Tevya is always saying, oh, everybody, why, why did you do it this way? Why did you do it this way? You made me this, you made me that. Oh, yeah. And it's like Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. It's saying, I'm crying to you, God, I'm being with you. I want you to be here, and you made me this, and you did this, and did this, and talk to me. And in the course of your pouring out your soul like that, you are expressing your intimacy with God, whether God answers you or not. Okay, and that's the beauty of later Jewish culture is that we are expressing an intimacy with God that we imagine is reciprocal, right? But here it's clear. God says one thing, and when does he talk again? I'll give you, next week we're going to talk about, I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but the Al-Qaeda is a good example, and you mentioned it, Ilana. Okay, so what happens after the Al-Qaeda? God says to Abraham, go take your son, and slaughter him and sacrifice him, and never speaks to Abraham again. How do you live your life that way? If you're a person of faith, you say, even though he doesn't speak to me, I still believe. And that's why Abraham is the model for us. Abraham is the model of faith because God only makes a glimpse in his life. And the glimpse of his life says, go. And he's got to wrestle with that. He's got to understand what that means. He goes and he sees Canaanites, not happy about that. God says, don't worry, this is your land. Okay, so he moves where he's a little freer, and he moves where he's freest, the Negev, where there's absolutely nobody, okay? And that's where he's going to live. He lives in Beersheba, right? But God gives him the land. His generations will come and say, and it's not an accident, that the great conflict in the Bible, when the Israelites finally make it into the land, what's their call? They have to conquer the land. They have to take it over from the Canaanites. The Canaanites live in the land, and they know that it's their land because God has promised it. And the entire book of Deuteronomy is when you will get into the land and there will be wars. But this is the land that God is saying to you because of the theology that it's not about settlement. It's not about squatters' rights. You do not get to live in a land because you squat there. You live there because I tell you. And that's the Bible's theology here. I like it or not. I don't want to be political about it today. I'm just trying to present, the biblical idea here. Obviously, this is problematic in every single nation in the world, right? Every nation has indigenous peoples, right? But we are arguing, well, we're indigenous too. What does that mean? And what does migration mean? What does it mean to be a migrant in a world? All of us, every single one of us, is a descendant of immigrants. And what does that mean? And we have all moved. Some of us in this class have not moved very far, but some of us have moved very, very far across the world, or across the country, or across half the country, or across the state, or across a few states. Okay, yeah, that's part of a life. And so you're always making a life based on what is dislocated from your life and what are you taking with you. And Abraham is the same person. Some people read, if you just Google a little bit and see how people want to kind of, there's a fascinating little set of stories about people who disappear, right? Their life is so horrible. They want to end their identity. They get on a plane, leave no trace. They end up somewhere else. They start a new life, a new family, a new everything, and they leave everything behind. Those stories are fascinating. They're kind of evil, okay, and dangerous stories. But they tell us that among certain people at a certain point in their life, rather than commit suicide and end their life, they love their life. They just don't want to live their life around the people that they live in. And for whatever reason, they have the means to do this. So they go into a kind of voluntary witness protection program where they have their own identity and they detach from everything and they establish a new life until the people from the old life intrude on the new life. It makes for a good novel. Okay. All right. Well, folks,
That's a lot.
we're going to have to end it there. It's too bad. All right. I wish you all a good week. This has given me so much to think about, and look forward to taking the story further and seeing you all.
Thank you, Yasha Koach.
All right.
Very good class today, Rabbi.